Have you ever wondered what it takes to heal a broken child's heart? Contrary to what most people believe, it wasn't the $200 an hour specialist with degrees from Harvard. It was the woman who cleaned their floors. I've researched hundreds of cases where expensive childcare failed, and this story reveals something profound about human connection. By the end of this story, you'll understand why the most qualified people on paper aren't always the most qualified to heal a heart. Marcus Wellington went from having 5 trained professionals quit in frustration to hearing his children's laughter echo through his mansion for the first time in months. If you skip this story, you'll miss the moment that shows why love always trumps credentials. The silence in Marcus Wellington's $15 million Manhattan penthouse was deafening. Not the kind of peaceful quiet that money could buy, but the hollow emptiness that no amount of wealth could fill. For 6 months since his wife Sarah's sudden death from cancer, the sound of children's laughter had vanished from their home like smoke in the wind. Marcus stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office overlooking Central Park, but his mind was elsewhere. Downstairs, his 5-year-old triplets, Emma, Ethan, and Ella, moved through their daily routines like tiny ghosts. They ate when food was placed before them, went to bed when told. But the spark that had once lit up every room they entered had died with their mother. The father in him was drowning. The CEO in him thought money could solve everything. He was wrong on both counts. Mrs. Catherine Pemberton had been his first attempt at professional help. With her Ivy League education and 20 years of experience managing children from Manhattan's elite families, she commanded $300 per day. Her credentials were impeccable, her references glowing. She lasted exactly 3 days. Mr. Wellington, she had announced on Tuesday morning, her designer handbag already packed. These children are unresponsive to proper behavioral techniques. They require psychiatric intervention, not childcare. Behind her expensive educational materials lay untouched color-coded schedules, developmental assessment charts, and structured activity plans that the triplets had simply ignored. Miss Jennifer Collins arrived the next day. Her child psychology degree specialized in trauma recovery, and her $250 daily rate reflected her expertise. She brought clinical approaches and maintained professional emotional distance, believing that boundaries would help the children process their grief. The triplets responded by retreating further into themselves. 2 days later, she was gone. They need professional therapy, not childcare, she declared, echoing her predecessor. Mrs. Patricia Williams, a former governess to celebrity families, charged $350 per day and brought military precision to child rearing. She implemented rigid rules, structured mealtimes, and consequences for non-compliance. The triplets complied without protest, but their eyes grew even more vacant. "They're deliberately defiant," she announced after 4 frustrating days. "They need stricter boundaries than I can provide." Miss Rachel Thompson, Montessori certified and fluent in 3 languages, lasted 2 days at $280 per day. Her focus on intellectual development through hands-on learning fell flat when the children showed no interest in participating. "I can't work with children who won't engage," she said, packing her multilingual flashcards and educational games. Mrs. Helen Montgomery, the most expensive at $400 per day, had a medical background specializing in childhood trauma. She treated the triplets like patients rather than children, taking notes on their behavior and recommending psychiatric evaluation. After just 1 day, she declared, "These children need psychiatric intervention, not supervision." In 1 week, Marcus had spent $8,750 on professional childcare. 5 highly qualified, extensively trained women had walked through his door with confidence and walked out in defeat. The triplets remained unreachable, 3 little islands of grief, floating in an ocean of expensive failure. Rosa Johnson had watched it all unfold from the sidelines. For 3 years, she had been part of the Wellington household staff, arriving each morning to clean, organize, and maintain the pristine penthouse. She had witnessed the family's joy before Sarah's illness, watched the slow deterioration during the cancer battle, and observed the complete shutdown after the funeral. Rosa understood grief intimately. As a single mother who had raised 4 children after her husband died in a construction accident, She knew that healing couldn't be scheduled, packaged, or purchased. It required something that no university could teach and no salary could compensate for: the ability to sit with pain without trying to fix it immediately. On Friday afternoon, as Mrs. Montgomery wheeled her case of diagnostic equipment toward the elevator, Marcus found himself alone with his children for the first time in weeks. Emma, Ethan, and Ella sat huddled together on their bedroom floor, knees drawn up, eyes staring at nothing. They hadn't spoken to him in months, hadn't spoken to anyone except in whispered fragments to each other. The sight broke something inside him that all his business success couldn't repair. Here he was, a man who could move millions with a phone call, negotiate billion-dollar deals with confidence, command respect in boardrooms across the globe, and he was powerless to reach 3 small children who shared his DNA and lived in his home. Rosa appeared in the doorway, dustcloth in hand, and quietly observed the scene. Her voice when she spoke was barely above a whisper. "Mr. Wellington, may I try something different?" Marcus looked up at this woman who had been invisible to him for years, who had no degrees in child psychology or certificates in behavioral management, who commanded a fraction of what he had paid the failed experts. His desperation answered before his logic could object. "Please," he said simply, "please try." Rosa Johnson had never read a single book on child psychology, but she had lived through the loss of a spouse and watched her own children navigate the impossible landscape of grief. She understood something the expensive experts had missed. Broken hearts don't heal on schedules, and trust can't be demanded. It must be earned one quiet moment at a time. On her first morning as the Triplets' caregiver, Rosa didn't arrive with lesson plans or behavioral charts. She carried only herself and a small bag containing 3 items: a worn photo of her own children, a container of homemade cookie dough, and a book of simple stories that had belonged to her youngest daughter. She found Emma, Ethan, and Ella in their playroom, sitting in their usual triangle formation on the Persian rug, surrounded by toys they no longer touched and games they no longer played. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like tiny spirits. Rosa didn't announce her presence or try to coax them into activities. Instead, she settled herself cross-legged on the floor about 6 feet away and began to sort through a small basket of yarn scraps she had brought from home. Her movements were unhurried, purposeful, but not demanding attention. She hummed softly, not a lullaby, but the kind of wordless melody that fills comfortable silence. The children watched her from the corners of their eyes, curious but cautious. After 20 minutes, Rosa spoke for the first time, her voice carrying the warm cadence of someone who had told countless bedtime stories. "Your mama loved colors," she said quietly, holding up a strand of yellow yarn. "I remember her picking flowers from the rooftop garden, always choosing the brightest ones for your playroom." She didn't look at the children as she spoke, giving them permission to listen without feeling obligated to respond. Emma's head turned slightly at the mention of her mother. It was the first voluntary movement any of the children had made in weeks that wasn't prompted by basic necessity. On Tuesday, Rosa brought the cookie dough. She didn't ask the children to help or explain what she was doing. She simply began mixing ingredients in a large bowl, her movements creating gentle sounds, the soft thud of wooden spoon against ceramic, the whisper of flour being sifted, the crack of eggs being opened. The familiar rhythms of domestic comfort filled the silence that had become so oppressive. "These were your mom's favorite cookies," Rosa mentioned casually as she worked. "She told me the recipe came from her grandmother, passed down through 4 generations of women who knew that sometimes the best medicine comes from an oven, not a pharmacy." Ethan's nose twitched at the emerging scent of vanilla and brown sugar. For the first time in months, one of the children moved closer to an adult without being asked. He didn't speak, but he sat within arm's reach of Rosa as she rolled the dough into small balls. By Wednesday, something had shifted in the household dynamics. Marcus, returning from an early morning board meeting, found Rosa and the children in the kitchen, not engaging in forced educational activities or structured therapeutic play, but simply existing in the same space. Emma was watching Rosa fold laundry, occasionally handing her small items without being asked. Ella had moved close enough to Rosa that their shoulders almost touched as they sat at the kitchen island. Ethan was drawing pictures with crayons, the first creative expression he had shown since his mother's death. Rosa's approach defied everything the professional nannies had attempted. She didn't try to redirect the children's grief or distract them from their loss. Instead, she created space for their feelings while modeling that life could continue alongside sorrow. "It's okay to miss Mommy," she would say when one of the children stared longingly at family photos. "I miss people I love too. Missing them means they were important to us, and that's a good thing even when it hurts." She told stories about Sarah that the hired professionals had been afraid to mention. "Your mama used to dance in the kitchen while she cooked Sunday breakfast. She said music made everything taste better, even scrambled eggs." These weren't therapeutic interventions designed to help children process their grief. They were simple acknowledgments that their mother had existed, had been wonderful, and that remembering her was not just acceptable, but necessary. Marcus found himself lingering in doorways, watching transformations that seemed impossible. The children who had been unreachable for months were beginning to respond to this woman who had been in their home all along but invisible to his notice. They ate the meals Rosa prepared without resistance. They participated in simple activities like sorting socks or arranging flowers. Most remarkably, they had begun to follow Rosa through the apartment, not clinging desperately, but moving with the natural gravitation of children who feel safe with an adult. Rosa never pushed for breakthroughs or celebrated small victories with the enthusiasm of someone trying to prove a therapeutic method. She simply accepted each day's emotional weather, sunshine or storms, with the patience of someone who understood that healing happens in cycles, not straight lines. By the end of the second week, the children were eating meals with Rosa at the kitchen table instead of retreating to their rooms. By the third week, they had begun sleeping through the night without nightmares. They still didn't speak much, but their eyes had begun to focus on the present instead of staring through it towards some unreachable past. Marcus watched from his home office as Rosa taught the children to water the plants in Sarah's rooftop garden plants that had been dying from neglect since the funeral. He saw Emma touch a rose petal with gentle fingers, saw Ethan examine a ladybug that landed on his hand, saw Ella lean against Rosa's shoulder as they sat in the sunshine. The changes were subtle, but unmistakable. These were still the same three children who had lost their mother, but they were no longer lost themselves. They had found something the expensive experts couldn't provide: an adult who saw their pain without trying to fix it, who honored their mother's memory without making it a therapy session, and who offered love without conditions or timelines. But they still hadn't laughed, not once. 3 weeks into Rosa's gentle care, Marcus's mother, Eleanor Wellington, arrived for her monthly inspection of her son's household management. Eleanor had never approved of Marcus marrying Sarah. A middle school teacher from Queens wasn't sophisticated enough for the Wellington family legacy, and she had even less patience for what she viewed as his current emotional indulgence. Eleanor surveyed the penthouse with the critical eye of someone accustomed to household staff performing invisible labor. She found Rosa in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the Persian rug, with the triplets arranged around her like flower petals. They were engaged in the simple activity of stringing colorful beads onto yarn, their small fingers working with careful concentration, while Rosa told a gentle story about a family of rabbits who planted a garden together. "Marcus," Eleanor announced in the clipped tone she used for business discussions, "this situation is absolutely ridiculous. You're paying a housekeeper to perform childcare duties she's completely unqualified for. These children need proper professional intervention, not whatever this is supposed to be." Her voice carried through the apartment like a cold wind, and the triplets immediately tensed. Emma's hands stilled on her beadwork. Ethan moved closer to Rosa's side. Ella's eyes went wide with the expression of a child who had learned that adult conversations often led to loss. Rosa kept her voice steady and warm, speaking directly to the children. "Let's put your beautiful necklaces somewhere safe so you can finish them tomorrow." But Eleanor continued her critique, addressing Marcus as if Rosa and the children were furniture. I've arranged interviews with 3 highly recommended child psychologists. Dr. Patricia Morrison from Mount Sinai has excellent credentials in pediatric trauma. The Whitman Institute has a residential program specifically designed for children experiencing selective mutism. These children need professional therapeutic intervention, not emotional coddling from domestic staff. Marcus felt torn between his mother's logical arguments and the evidence of his own eyes. The children hadn't spoken to him in months, but they followed Rosa willingly. They ate when she prepared meals, slept peacefully when she tucked them in, and showed the first signs of engagement he had seen since Sarah's death. Still, Eleanor's words carried the weight of social expectation and family tradition. Rosa, overhearing the conversation, approached Marcus privately later that afternoon. Her words were respectful but clear. "Mr. Wellington, if you think the children would be better served by professional therapists, I understand completely. I can step back to my regular household duties and help transition them to whatever care you feel is most appropriate." But as Rosa spoke these words, something unprecedented happened. Emma appeared in the doorway, her small face pale with panic. "Don't go," she whispered, the first words she had spoken to any adult since her mother's funeral 6 months earlier. The 2 simple words electrified the household. Marcus froze. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. But before anyone could respond, Ethan and Ella came running, their small arms wrapping around Rosa's legs like life preservers. "Please don't leave us," Ethan whispered into Rosa's blue uniform. "We need you." Ella, the youngest, looked up with eyes that held months of accumulated fear. "Are you going to disappear like Mommy did?" The moment shattered Marcus's heart and rebuilt it simultaneously. These were his children's voices, rusty from disuse, but unmistakably real, and they were speaking not to him, not to any of the expensive professionals, but to the woman his mother dismissed as just domestic staff. Rosa knelt to the children's level, gathering them close, but not possessively. "I'm not going anywhere unless your daddy decides it's best for you. But listen to me." She looked into each small face with absolute sincerity. "Even if I had to go away, that wouldn't mean I stopped caring about you. Sometimes people leave not because they want to, but because they have to. Your mommy didn't want to leave you. She would have stayed forever if she could have." Marcus found his voice. "Rosa, you're not going anywhere. Mother, we need to discuss this privately." But Rosa had one more gift to offer. "Would you like to see your mama's garden? She planted special flowers just for you, and I think they're ready to show you something beautiful." The rooftop garden had been Sarah's sanctuary, a place where she had spent hours tending vegetables and flowers 30 floors above the Manhattan streets. Since her death, Marcus couldn't bear to visit it, and the plants had been maintained by building staff without family presence. Rosa led the children through the terrace doors into the afternoon sunshine. The garden was more beautiful than Marcus remembered. Roses in full bloom, herbs releasing their fragrance into the warm air, and vegetables growing in neat rows that Sarah had planned as learning tools for her children. "Your mama planted these carrots so you could watch them grow," Rosa said, kneeling beside a raised bed. "She wanted you to understand that beautiful things take time and patience, just like growing up." Emma reached out to touch a carrot top, her face showing wonder instead of sorrow for the first time in months. "Mama's carrots are really tall." Rosa smiled. "She would be so proud of how big they've grown, just like she would be proud of how much you've grown." Then something magical happened. A butterfly, bright yellow with black spots, landed directly on Ethan's nose. The unexpected tickle made him giggle. Actually giggle as he went cross-eyed, trying to see his tiny visitor. The sound triggered something primal in his sisters. Ella began laughing at her brother's ridiculous expression, her giggles building into the pure, uninhibited laughter of a 5-year-old who had remembered how to be delighted by the world. Emma joined in, pointing at the butterfly that seemed determined to stay perched on Ethan's nose, despite his gentle attempts to shoo it away. For the first time in 6 months, the sound of children's laughter echoed across the rooftop garden. Real laughter bubbling up from someplace deeper than grief, proving that joy could coexist with loss, and that healing was not only possible, but happening in real time. Marcus appeared in the garden doorway, drawn by sounds he had thought he might never hear again. Tears streamed down his face as he watched his children, his beautiful, broken, healing children, discover that they could still be happy without betraying their mother's memory. Marcus Wellington stood frozen in the doorway, watching his children laugh for the first time since their mother's death. The butterfly had finally fluttered away, but the magic it had sparked remained. Emma, Ethan, and Ella were chattering excitedly, pointing at flowers and vegetables, asking Rosa questions that had been trapped inside them for months. "Rosa," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "you've given me my children back." Rosa looked up from where she knelt among Sarah's flowers, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "Mr. Wellington, they were never really gone. They just needed someone who could see their hearts instead of trying to fix their behavior." Emma tugged on Rosa's blue uniform. "Can we make Mama's carrot soup tomorrow? You said she taught you the recipe. And can we plant more flowers for Mama?" added Ethan, his voice stronger than it had been in months. Ella, the baby of the family, climbed into Rosa's lap with the natural trust of a child who felt completely safe. "Rosa, you're like our second mama now." Marcus felt something shift permanently in his understanding of what his children needed. All the money he had spent on credentials and expertise had failed to accomplish what Rosa had achieved through simple presence and unconditional love. 3 months later, the Wellington penthouse buzzed with life again. The triplets had returned to school, bringing home artwork and stories they eagerly shared at dinner. Their teachers reported remarkable progress, not just academically, but in their social connections and emotional resilience. Rosa had been officially promoted to full-time caregiver with a salary that reflected her true value to the family. More importantly, she had become what Ella had named her, their second mama, the bridge between their grief and their future. Marcus had learned to balance his demanding career with present-moment parenting. Family dinners became sacred time filled with conversation about school adventures, garden discoveries, and plans for weekend activities. The children still missed their mother, they always would, but they had learned that love doesn't die with loss. It transforms and continues in new ways. The most beautiful change was the sound that now filled their home, daily children's laughter, as natural and necessary as breathing proof that joy and sorrow could live side by side in hearts big enough to hold both. Sometimes the most important qualifications can't be printed on paper or framed on a wall. Sometimes healing comes not from expertise, but from someone who sees your heart and chooses to stay. If Rosa's story touched your heart and you'd like to hear more inspiring stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Every week I share stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Which moment resonated with you most? Emma's first words asking Rosa to stay, the breakthrough laughter in the garden? Or Marcus's realization about what really matters? Share in the comments below.